Okay, we're in chapter 13, the urban environment, creating a sustainable city. So our case study is actually about Oregon. You need to know the definition of urban versus rural. If you are in a city of more than 2,500, you're considered urban. If the population is less than that, you're actually in a rural area. A suburban area is considered to be urban due to it being on the outskirts of a city. From the city center. So Vernon Hills is actually considered to be a suburb. The world is starting to shift from rural to urban. So in the world, we are actually seeing that shift from urban to rural, changes of politics as well, because people in urban areas actually have a different view on the world government than individuals in rural areas. So typically, as people move from rural to urban areas, there's a decline in birth rate. This is attributed to the fact that you don't need as many people on the farm if you don't have a farm. And then on top of that, let's say you live in Africa, you have 8 kids, your farm gets handed down to the oldest child if they want it. So you have 7 other kids that are in need of a job. So really, most of the work is in cities. So kids will actually up and move to the city locations to get their work. So we're seeing that pull and growth and shift towards urban locations. So in general, why do people move to cities? Well, there are 2 reasons. They're either pulled or pushed there. One way they're pulled is just for jobs, like we just said. Another is for better health care. So people will actually move from rural to urban areas as they get older to have access to the better healthcare systems. Cities tend to provide better education and college opportunities. They also move to cities due to pushes like war and famine in the rural areas or environmental degradation. So as there's more deforestation, there's less wood for heating, building materials, and there's less plants or animals to hunt. So people actually have to move to the cities in order to survive. So in general, there's a trend in the U.S. People are moving from the north and the east to the west and south. So California is growing as well as Arizona. People are getting tired of the cold and are starting to move away towards Florida and Georgia. There are also places like Detroit that are actually shrinking significantly in population. So now that we know why people want to move to cities, why are people also wanting to move to the suburbs? And that's called sprawl. It's a spreading out of high density populations to low density areas. So people want single family homes, they want more land. So the city starts to spread out horizontally instead of vertically, using more resources. Without cars and roads, people wouldn't move to the suburbs. So after World War II, we actually are seeing that cars are not just for the wealthy, but they're also for the average person. Road systems started to develop during the Great Depression, and after the 1930s, we have roads and cars and cheap gas. So in the 1950s, people could actually live in the suburbs and drive to the city for work. And that was the first thing that started the spur to sprawl out towards the suburbs. People wanted to have their car, their home, their yard. They had more affluence, so there was a big portion of that you live in the suburb. Homes typically were cheaper then. House in the suburbs is cheaper than a house in the trendy part of the city. So people want a little bit more of a yard, cheaper homes, so they actually moved further from the city to the outskirts to get that. People also wanted to move for better schools, less crime, and less pollution. So again, that's called urban sprawl, and urbanization actually starts to cause the depletion of resources. We start to see more saltwater intrusion from the water cycle, effects of the carbon cycle with the burning of fossil fuels and landfills, and an increase of CO2 in the atmosphere as we see more people in the cities. You need to know the 5 negative impacts of sprawl. So there's transportation. More people in the suburbs will actually drive to work instead of walk, so they aren't using the L or walking like they used to in the past, or using city buses. There's more air pollution due to the fact that transportation is coming from longer distances, and so there's more greenhouse gases as well. And there's also even health problems due to the fact that you are stressing out more from your driving. Additionally, we have high rates of obesity, which is due to lower amounts of exercise and sitting in your car for a longer period of time. We use more land. Urbanization causes the depletion of resources, decreasing evaporation, transpiration, areas of groundwater recharge due to more cement. This also increases runoff. The water cycle is affected due to the movement from the forest to a concrete urban area. So we start to see that as a problem. Increased water infiltration, permeable pavement, planting trees, increased use of transportation, building up and not necessarily out is one way to also help mitigate this. And these impervious surfaces are due to human-made structures. They don't allow that water to reach the soil, leading to a lot of flooding. So in the city, we have zoning that tells you what you can and can't do in certain areas. City planning is done this way. We also have regional planning that goes beyond the city limits, and this is basically to build an idea about where jobs should be, developments, where those can go, the growth of parks, where people should live, etc. So that's another big aspect of regional planning. Municipal is a word that just means anything to do with the city. So the municipal water supply is the water supply that a city would have. So when you hear that word, that's what it's attributed to. So how do we actually keep the nice things of the suburbs, but get rid of the negative things that we have going on? We look at smart growth principles and new urbanism to accomplish this. So there are the smart growth principles and new urbanism are actually on this page. We start to see areas more like Melody Farms where people have shopping, they can walk to, and living spaces above, so jobs and living are close to each other. We would also see more single family and multi-family mixtures, so multi-use of the land, building upward more, or housing that has less yard space. So in the olden days, people used to live above their shop and everything was walkable distance. Crime and pollution moved in, so people wanted to move far away from the city. So how do we create a nice aspect of the suburbs with less commute, less pollution? And this is what smart growth and new urbanism is trying to do. So work and live in the same place with the cafes, the shops, the housing, and everything else close by. You should know these graphs and be able to interpret them. These will show the energy use, and the highest energy use is actually from cars instead of other transportation, and as well as the costs that go into it. So driving your own car to work actually costs more money. Parks are really important in urban areas. This is a picture of Central Park in New York City. They provide scenic views, air purification, water infiltration, greenery, and places for recreational use. So we actually have other aspects of this as well. We look at, actually Chicago right here makes the list. So some cities are trying to become green and more livable. They're developing greenways, which are strips of land that are along rivers or creeks or streams and connect neighborhoods, or parks like walkways. We're doing this in the city quite a bit. There are green belts, which are wider parklands that circle larger cities like forest preserves that we actually have around Chicago. There's a lot of green building and LEED building techniques that are built to minimize ecological footprints with their construction and their operation. So some of those LEED things that we have going on are like water efficiency toilets, the ones that you go down for solid waste or up for liquid waste. Landscaping with native plants to reduce pesticide and water use, because if they're native, they're used to the pests in this area and the amount of water that is received naturally. Using deciduous vegetation that will shade the building, so you can see that here, the trees shade the building in the summer and then let light in the winter when they lose their leaves. You got a bunch of other options as well, so make sure you know a few of these, and there's actually more in this chart up in this area as well. So this is a positive and negative chart for cities. So we have some good. Higher population density gives you more intact ecosystems outside of the city. In Japan, we're starting to see this. Tokyo is a huge city with a lot of people living in it, and they're living, more vertically than horizontally. So because of that, they have left a lot of areas around the city as pristine forests. So people will actually are avoiding sprawl out into the suburbs. They'll leave the city and they'll head to the forest to enjoy the beauty, but then they'll come back to the city without destroying that area. So you actually see better medical care again. We talked about that. More efficient public services like sewer and electricity. You have more college type education, but not always the best education for elementary and high school. Some negative parts of cities are that it's a resource sink. So you should understand the definition of that. Basically, everything has to be shipped into the city. Food, goods, power. There's very little produced actually in the city itself. So you have more pollution, air, water, noise, and light pollution. This affects the poor more because they are unable to actually move out into the suburbs to get away from it. So we start to see an environmental injustice or justice issue as well. We also see a heat island because all the concrete, the cities are actually hotter and they absorb that heat during the day and then release it slowly at night. So we see bigger ecological footprints as well due to wealth. Not every part of the city is wealthy, but there are very, very wealthy areas compared to rural areas. We aren't talking suburban because this is actually a part of the city. So the urban area does have more wealth because again we include that suburban area, and therefore we have more of an ecological footprint. Oh, sorry. Make sure you know the captions of the urban heat island and why the cities are actually warmer than rural areas. They asked this question a few years ago and they would not accept the fact that there are more cars letting off heat, and they wouldn't accept that there's more people letting off heat. So they want it just focused on concrete emitting heat. So noise pollution is a big one, causes stress for people, as well as light pollution. It can prevent good night's sleep. So these are two health issues that go into it. So it does create a stress as well as hearing loss. Urban areas have transportation, construction, industrial activities, stresses animals, masks the communication or the hunting between animals, can also damage the hearing of animals and migratory routines if they can't hear their mates. But it also has damage to us as well. And this is the end of this chapter.